Welcome to Defender. I'm your host, David Marsh, and today we have an excellent show lined up for you with special guest, Doug Dreyer. I'd like to welcome Doug Dreyer to the show. He has an incredible bio. He's currently applying his expertise as a senior physical security engineer for a Fortune 50 company. Highlights of his background include COO of Asset Defense Consulting, founder and managing director of Shield Security Group, principal at Intersect Group, and served in the U.S. Army, the Army National Guard, and over a decade with the U.S. Navy as director of security and physical security program manager, and a lot more. So, Doug, thanks for jumping on Defender. I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me. More than happy to join you in this effort. And what a great day to just sit down and talk.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot to unpack, a lot happening in the security world for sure. As technology keeps getting more and more advanced, a lot of things happening there. And then, of course, there's always some kind of threat that we have to detour. So as security professionals, we have our work cut out for us for sure. I just wanted to kind of go through your background. I was just fascinated by it, and I thought it'd be great to just kind of see your journey from your background into the security industry. What got you into the security industry, and if you wanted to kind of cover that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Made my first visit to an Army National Guard armory in Hartford, Connecticut in December of 1981. Raised my right hand in January of 1982. Was with the Army National Guard Military Police. So first introduction to security. Until November of 85 when I transitioned to the active Army. Was assigned to a physical security military police company in South Korea. Loved it over there. Loved what we were doing. Both whether it was in garrison or in the field. Providing physical security and then learning from my leaders. What does physical security actually mean? What does it entail? Cool part, while I was in the National Guard, I actually got certified as an electronics technician and a microprocessor technician back in the day.
Wow.
That was in 1983. Being National Guard, still had time to go to school and everything like that. Just, wow, fascinating. And we'll talk more about where we've come from, but I remember going into Radio Shack and building breadboards with components and doing component level troubleshooting. And one of my first true physical security introductions to a device was the old Joint Service Intrusion Detection System called JSIDs. That was the alarms. Those were all these separate boxes that were tied in with phone cables. And those were the alarms at the military police station, and being trained how to repair those, how to fix them, how to install those. So that was really my first deep dive into the device side of physical security.
Sure.
As far as what I term the hardcore parts of physical security, gates, fences, barriers, stuff like that. Stayed until 1996, variety of jobs throughout the Army at various locations around the world. One of the last physical security NCOs at the Berlin Brigade. In fact, the last one assigned to the brigade proper, not the garrison, but to the brigade proper, and transitioned down to Grafenwehr, Germany after, and did some work with Army CID. Got a chance to flex some anti-terrorism and force protection before ATFP was actually a term with that team. That goes back to November of 91. I was honored that I was accepted into an anti-terrorism instructor qualification course. The only one at the time was at Fort Bragg. at Smoke Bomb Hill with the Green Beret School with JFK Special Warfare Center. It was really strict criteria to get in. Very small class, 20
Really?
people.
Oh, wow.
Broken into small groups and this was the only one at the time for Department of Defense. This course was the only way you could get certified. So, I mean, in my small group, we had Navy, Marine Corps, Army, Air Force. And it was probably one of the most mentally challenging courses I've been through.
Wow.
But kind of set me on the path. Continue with anti-terrorism. Work with the counterterrorism teams. Work with physical security hardcore. Transitioned out of the Army in May of '96. Was ready reserve. Was working actually various jobs. We'll talk about military transition, I think, in a little while.
Yeah.
And said, you know what? Not for me. Talked to the Navy Reserve, and they were willing to take me back in. Went down to the MEP station because it had been a while. Had to retake all the tests and get the physicals. And they offered me an active duty position right then and there.
Wow.
I called my wife, and she was like, go for it. And 2 weeks later, I was at Great Lakes.
That's
and
insane.
Was there. We were at Great Lakes, and I was assigned to Bahrain, to the naval station in Bahrain. I believe it's a naval support unit or naval support activity is the new term for it. I was there when 9/11 happened.
Oh.
I was in the Middle East. And was pulled into a physical security position with Naval Central Forces Command, along with a retired Master Chief who was a civil servant at the time. And we were the only two physical security people for all of NAVCENT with all of the countries we had to cover.
Wow.
So we stayed super busy doing lots of really cool stuff. Both combat zone type stuff, minor deployments into there. More though focused on the support element. How do we make sure that we were doing supply chain security to make sure that we could get what we needed into country through various different country stops. So that was really a driving force again that just solidified. I love this. I have a passion for this, and it just kind of locks it down into your heart and into your soul. After that, my wife is actually from South Korea. I met her when I was there in the Army.
Oh, neat.
And then we went to the U.S. Naval Commander Fleet Activities Chinhae in southern part of Korea. So we stayed there for a couple of years and then transited to the United States and then back to Japan and all over typical military transitions. And I retired out of Japan in 2011.
Wow.
What a ride.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you, with anything after 9/11 just had to be kind of next level in terms of all of the changes that you had to have experienced at that point.
Oh, yes, sir. Most definitely. And I was actually at the point of transitioning my family to Bahrain with me because at the time, pre 9/11, you could bring your family over if you extended your tour over there. That kind of got shut down really quick. But having them tell me and friends back at Great Lakes tell me what was occurring there kind of made me feel good because they had the right people in place to do what they needed to do to protect the families, protect the base. So that freed me up mind-wise to go forward and do missions in all these other countries using Bahrain as the base for it. And then being in South Korea was at that time, it was a lot different than when I was there the first time. especially with the Navy. We were pulling ships into different ports where we might not have a U.S. military presence. So we would go in advance of those ships and set up all the anti-terrorism, all the force protection things, work with husbanding agents, with our NCIS counterparts, with the Korean National Police counterparts, to make sure that we could keep these people safe, that we could keep our stuff secure. And it's a totally different mindset. You hit that nail dead on the head, David. It was a totally different mindset after 9/11.
Yeah, I mean, just everything had to be elevated, and just the anti-terrorism aspect of everything had to be just elevated at that point, because you're in a war footing. And then of course South Korea seems to be in the news quite often, just because of what their neighbor. In fact, I think, was it just yesterday? Another incident. So, firing something off, of course. So, that has to be a quite an interesting area to be in. That'd be kind of like being, in West Germany during the wall being put up. Because
I can agree with that.
You just don't know what's going to happen next, right? You're in the epicenter. So whatever does happen, it happens very quickly, I suppose, but still not a great thing.
It would be even Chinhae is far. So Chinhae is just west of Busan, so it sits on the southern coast. The Commander Fleet Activities Chinhae is conjoined with probably one of the largest South Korean naval bases. When you realize you're in missile range, and it's minutes, and the person up north has one of the largest stockpiles of chemical weapons.
Oh, man.
The planning aspect from an anti-terrorism standpoint was actually one of the better exercises that I've gone through. Making sure we had the coordination. Were we doing the appropriate things? Were we supporting our chain of command? And the greater naval forces Korea at the time.
Sure.
You walk around with your head on a swivel. Even in a relatively safe country, when you realize that you're that close. In the anti-terrorism world, our job, and physical security is the same way. Your job is to keep people safe, keep items secure, assets secure. And you realize just how vulnerable you are, and that you can't mitigate that particular vulnerability. You can only do what you can do.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely next level. I think I was thinking about this, just going from military life into civilian has to be very interesting. You go from this high octane, almost like a race car driver, and then he comes in and is driving his Prius when he comes home. So you're going from one extreme, to another. Obviously, a lot of things that you carry with you, though, from that world, and that background has to be a big help. But what was that transition like, going from military life and then adjusting into civilian?
Yeah, it's a large adjustment. It's a very large adjustment. You can't understate it enough. Let's talk about the first transition when I exited the Army. The programs, policies that were in place when I retired in 2011 were not in place in 1996. That was an extremely difficult time. I would say a significant emotional event. Thinking one thing, this is how it's going to occur. I had applied in advance, done everything I could. Remember, this is 1996.
Right. Totally
this is
different.
like pre-internet. So I'm applying where I can apply. Luckily, had a landing pad in the western side of Virginia. My parents lived down there. My brother and his wife lived down there. So we had kind of a parachute.
Yeah.
To say that it was a culture shock doesn't do it justice. Physically going out once I was there and doing the resume walk, right? Let me go in and apply for anything I can because I need to support my family, right?
Right.
I've got a wife and 2 young kids, how are we going to do this? Zoom forward to 2011, where we have, coming out of the military, you have transition assistance programs. There are job fairs that are held now, where we didn't have any of that in 1996.
Wow.
And post 9/11, President Bush had signed, as part of the Patriot Act, you could transition and accept a position as a civil servant 6 months prior to your retirement date or your end of service date if you weren't retiring, right? Your contractual obligation.
That's a huge help.
That was a huge help because in 1996, you had to wait 180 days after to even apply.
Wow.
That was a huge assistance. Retire, because I was in Sasebo, Japan when I retired. I had already secured my position as a security director with the Navy as a civil servant. So when I retired, I walked into 76 days of drawing double pay because I was on terminal leave, and they allow you to do that under federal law. And again, taking that security director role, a lot more responsibility, of course, because you're responsible and accountable for everything that occurs.
Yeah.
But kind of a warm, fuzzy, safe place, because it's, to your previous comment, it's the same.
Yeah.
It's where it came from. Yeah, it's very familiar territory. Shifting into the commercial side, into the civilian sector, and hopefully that phrase doesn't offend anybody, but shifting into the civilian sector, have a large number of former military retirees that I work with now who have been through similar. The corporations now actively, especially Fortune 50, actively recruit former military.
That's smart.
It's very smart. They're getting a mindset. They're getting a work ethic. But more important, they have internal transition programs to help you make that leap.
Nice.
There are some that have internships. There are some that hire veterans, and as a corporate entity with a budget, there's no cost to you. The corporation absorbs that, so your team doesn't pay the salary for the first 6 months, kind of a probationary period kind of thing. There's training that they give out. A large number of the Fortune 50, I would even go to Fortune 100, provide training. A lot of the trades that I deal with, construction type trades, security device installers, security integrators, they provide training for veterans in that. Apprenticeship programs. And I can tell you this, I know that the Navy, can't speak for the Army or the Air Force or the Marine Corps, but I'm sure the Marine Corps probably has the same thing. They're tied into the Department of Labor now, where you can get your apprenticeship finished while you're still in active duty. So,
oh, wow.
While the transition now is easier, it's still not easy. I've seen quite a few memes out there make me laugh. One of them is, I'm trying to stay in my swim lane, but y'all keep jumping in. because in the military, you're taught to just kind of stay in your swim lane, right? Do your job, do it the best you possibly can. Sure, there are little side things that we do collaterally, but pretty much this is where I go. In some of the corporate sector, you're hopping all over the pool. There's no such thing as lane markers. And that's a different kind of stress than you have in the military. And I would tell you, if you channel it correctly, it's a positive stress.
Sure. It's just not predictable.
Right. And it's something new every day, which I find very refreshing. It's something new every day. Can it be frustrating? Yes. But if you take it appropriately and channel it, like I said, in the correct manner, I use it as a driver.
Well, it's smart. I mean, that helps us to adapt, as things continue to change. And it's really hard. It's easy to get kind of just stuck in sort of that cement for anybody, really. But you just get used to a way of, whether it's methodologies or whatever. And we talk about this all the time, just in terms of business too. But it is good to be challenged a little bit, because it's super easy to kind of slide into that, same is good, right? Yeah. Where you feel like that's sort of a safe place. But as you know, things are continually changing on the threat aspect for security. And so, things that we didn't have to think about 5 or 10 years ago now is here, not coming. And so that's the biggest thing I think of is, I think security people in general are very aware of adaptability and adapting to new threats and sort of thinking ahead, which is sort of that chess move mentality, right? This might happen next, this might happen, and you're doing scenarios continuously, trying to figure out, like you said, I want to keep people and then property and assets secure. So I have to think ahead of the bad guys, which is a challenge. But yeah, I mean, I think that background has to be an amazing advantage, just in terms of where you're coming from and just understanding the role, and then of course growing as you went through your career. You had quite a few different levels of expertise in there. That was amazing.
No, thank you, and I agree with you 100%. Look, I one of my mantras: learn something new every day. I read voraciously. I have an API that I've set up on my home computer that actually, I call it my web spiders, and it searches out news articles for me. So I have a TLDR in the morning that I can sit with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and go over and say, what happened in the world? Yeah. North Korea. Oh, let's shoot something else off today.
Yeah.
Or, hey, this new product's coming on the market. Okay, well, let me read about it. And then if I think it's worthy, I might deep dive it if I have the chance. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's exactly what I do. Same thing. You have your kind of RSS feeds, and you're looking at sort of those things that come in, and of course you're like, okay, add, here's some meat.
Exactly.
Here's something I'm actually interested in kind of diving into. And that sort of is, I think, a good position to be in, where you do have at least a lot of data that does come in, but of course, interpreting data and having it where it's useful. I mean, there's a lot of data, but it's gaining that useful data. That's the hard part, right?
That's the hard, is parsing the data and interpreting and analyzing it correctly.
Absolutely. So I was going to ask you one thing,
sure,
especially based on your career, is what would you say to a young person who looks at the physical security industry, especially? I think cyber gets a lot of press, and obviously there's a huge need for it. And our worlds are becoming more and more entangled, I suppose. But the physical security industry is in a growing industry, and there's a lot to it. And I see that as an expanding world as well. What would you say to a young person who wants to get into that? What's your advice to them?
If you want to join the physical security industry, wow, there's a lot of paths to take.
Yeah.
There's a lot of paths that weren't open 10, 15 years ago. You could start with a contract guard force company. Learn the basics. If you want to attend college, there are degrees now in Homeland Security that are pretty in-depth. Security management, the emergency management side of it, because there's a synergy and a synchronicity between physical security, anti-terrorism, counterterrorism, and emergency management that has to exist for a company to have business continuity and resiliency based on whatever the impact of an occurrence or a possible event is.
That's a great point.
We saw that in COVID, right?
Yeah.
Where a lot of companies didn't have a pandemic plan and were kind of making it up as they go. So they were kind of relying on a lot of ex-military or ex-first responders who already had FEMA training and understood the emergency management side of the house. Pick your lane. And then once I would tell you, I like to say it like this, hit your comfort zone and then figure out where you need to flex to. What else do I need to learn to make myself a more rounded applicant, candidate, employee, for lack of a better term.
No, I like that. I think that, and I understand what you mean. It's you're going to have a natural inclination to certain things, and you'll do those very well. And so that's sort of your start. And then once you sort of have that down, then you can sort of launch into these other areas that are related. But it is nice to have sort of a footing in something that you're just good at. It just sort of happens, and that's good advice.
Yeah, I mean, mine started kind of dual path. I was the tech guy because I was an electronics technician, by schooling and by trade, and a microprocessor technician, which I used to be able to walk into Radio Shack and buy them for like $2. Can't do that nowadays.
No.
And then got the operations side of the house. So it definitely rounded me out. And moving into the training side, how are we running drills and exercises? The operational planning side. How are we writing our procedures and policies, right? How are we doing pre-planned responses? How are we documenting them? How are we validating that they're real, that they can be executed? Are they smart, for lack of a better term?
Sure. Yeah, so, I think just getting somebody on the right track on that. Obviously, there's ASIS and a few other organizations.
SIA, there's a lot of them. The Sheriff's Association.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: if you've got your space and that's where your comfort zone, and you want to reach out, hey, maybe I want to go to the project management side. You can look at PMI. You can look at a lot of people don't know it, AAPM. So PMI does have a competitor. AAPM is the American Association of Project Managers. They will certify you in project management. So
it's a huge component for sure.
It's a huge component in the security industry. Whether it's on the integrator side and you're doing installations, right? Whether that's commercial, residential, whatever that security integrator is best at. Or is it on, again, the guard force side where you're running operations, where you're planning, hey, how will we protect, and meet our key performance indicators under that contract to company X. You always need that project management background to set the milestones and to make sure you meet the goals in a timely manner.
Yeah, just organizational aspect of it alone is just a huge benefit for any company that has that.
Yeah.
And so that, yeah, right. Yeah, that's definitely some good advice for somebody coming up and getting into that. And then as we see like the technology component, last decade, like you were saying, we've seen a lot of changes. Where do you see things? There's a lot going on. Where do you see the next 5 going, especially coming from, an engineering background? You can, I'm sure you're paying attention to robotics and these other components, but it's a big world. There's a lot of things happening, and you have to worry about, where something's made, and then, what could be engineered into things. Very tiny. We saw that, hit the security industry in the face pretty good there over the last 5 years. So, where do we go from here? And then where do you see the next 5 going in terms of so what's on your radar in terms of tech?
Yeah. Wow. My favorite topic. I call it the toy room. Yeah. And actually it's kind of the favorite part of my job. Where we're going in the next 5 years, I've been asked by my leadership the same thing. Hey, we need a roadmap. In the last 2 years, I'm not sure I can do that. And here's why, just to be very specific. I can give you a general roadmap, but not as specific as I could 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Where it was as simple as, okay, we're going to get more megapixels per camera. We're going to go to 4K. Now we're going to 8K. Where we're going to be able to leverage AI, which we do. There's a lot of good AI out there. We're starting to see artificial intelligence and what I would call it advanced analytics machine learning at the edge, where it's actually included with that camera that you purchase for video surveillance. We're seeing AI leveraged with things like 3D LiDAR, which if you've never seen a 3-dimensional LiDAR display nowadays, it's not the old 8-band LiDAR that we were used to 4 years ago. There are LiDAR devices out there now that are 128-band LiDAR units.
Wow.
It's like watching that scene from The Matrix where the code's falling and you can see the person.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing now, and to the point where there are companies who are taking those 3-dimensional LiDAR images and overlaying. The last one I saw was 16, so RGB color, right? And it creates a 2-dimensional photograph. Okay, are we getting to the point now where I won't need cameras? Where this can do it in a 3-dimensional, in an X, Y, and Z space?
Right. I mean, that is truly next level, where now you have AI looking at that data too.
Yeah.
That's
it reduces your nuisance alarm rate because it learns and it understands. We have AIs now that are out there that I say, okay, look at this door. If anybody walks out of that door with a box after 5 p.m., you alarm and the guards will respond, because I don't want anybody carrying anything out.
Right.
If it sees a human being carrying a box or something in their hand, it will alarm. We've got artificial intelligence out there now that I will say we're well beyond nascent stage on some of these. There are some that are still crawl stage. We've got some now that I've watched red teams try and confuse it, and it can't be confused.
Wow.
And now I'm seeing where you combine that with thermal imaging, and your red team's done.
Yeah, we're looking at that as well.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about layered security, because it's not just one component, and that's really all of these things layered together, and having multiple technologies to mitigate these threats. I mean, it becomes harder and harder for an adversary to do that. So that's exciting.
And where 2 or 3 years ago, these were separate devices.
Right.
Now we're seeing them integrated into a single system. And
that's exciting. Wow. And then the analytic component, like you were mentioning earlier, the problem with analytics was, clouds come over and you would get false alarms. And so the analytic became sort of useless. everybody just turned it off. And now with the AI and these things becoming smarter and smarter, now I'm finally seeing the benefits to the end customer, where now this stuff is actually helping them. They're not turning it off because of the false alarms. And so, yeah, this is definitely the future.
I think it is. And let's take it one step further. A month ago in Austria, you had a team working with quantum computing, and they were able to network quantumly 25 kilometers each way, so 50 kilometers round trip, over a standard fiber line. So this is quantum, this is entanglement over a standard fiber line. What does that do to our industry in the future?
Well, they were talking about quantum computers will be able to break basically like a cryptocurrency.
Oh yeah.
I think they were saying by 2030, which means I'm sure they're already doing it, but that just shows you, that next level of computing, it's always moving. And so then there's going to be other things I'm sure to advance the algorithms to make it where it can't be broken. But yeah, that's a very exciting future with the quantum computing component. It's definitely early. I look at D-Wave all the time just to see what they're up to.
Yeah. The cool part about the AI in the security realm, and there's a lot of news out there right now about AI.
Yeah.
That's the more general ChatGPT-4, Bing. Ours is kind of guardrailed to what's called computer vision or camera vision.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where it becomes really effective for us, because when you look at it in the security industry, the most expensive part of security is our operational expense. It's our guard force, right? If you're using guard force.
Absolutely.
The only true way right now to replace a post. So if you're using a 4 or a 5 model per post, 5, individual staff model per post, to replace that operational expense, that can be somewhere around, depending on what the standard pay, what state you're in, and stuff like that, could be $250,000 a year for one post. The only way to truly replace it right now is with an integrated AI, where you have 250 threat vectors loaded in there, 500 threat vectors loaded in there. I've spoken with AI companies where they haven't found a top limit yet. That in itself kind of scares me, but it kind of intrigues me as well. The other piece with AI, and this goes back to what you stated before about where is it built? Where is it assembled? Where are the component pieces coming from?
Right.
How do we validate that that's secure? That's another path that people can go down. And this is where I liked your statement about cybersecurity. Because if you search physical security on the web, you're going to come up, your first probably 5 to 10 matches are all going to be cybersecurity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This is where we're starting to synchronize and align, because the majority of our physical security systems now require networking. So there is a need in the physical security industry for software development engineers, for network engineers, the technical program managers who understand all of this and can put together a project. And they are probably the unicorn. I've got one really good friend, known him for about 10 years. He's a software development engineer.
Yeah.
Who loves working in the security field. And I was like, don't ever go anywhere I think he's got like 5 or 6 patents already. One of the smartest humans I've ever met, and just a great person on top of it. That's another path people could go down. Look, if the cyber stuff intrigues you, we need you on our side as well.
Yeah.
Because who's building all this? Who's building the firmware for cameras? Who's building? So let's take Genetech or Secure from Software House or Linnell. Somebody's got to program all that stuff, and those are SDEs. Those are network engineers. And that goes right back to our quantum computing. How is this going to move forward? How does a rack look that I'm setting up that's going to have switches and fiber patch, and servers in there? How do we deal with the cloud?
Well, that's the thing, is the cloud component where the computing's being done, especially if you're talking about quantum computing, no one's going to have that on site.
No.
So that's going to be often and done in cloud. And it is interesting how these things are getting tied, which is literally the opposite of sort of a lot of the historic, security was to have a dedicated, isolated security network as a way of protecting. Look at critical infrastructure. Everything is, when it's opened up, it opens up some challenges to that. So I agree. Like, especially the things that are on board, though. Just looking at how these things are being made and the people that are going to be programming them. And of course, we need that brain trust here. And I think we're seeing more and more, at least from the United States, kind of top down. They're looking at doing, bringing more businesses in here to manufacturing wise to do some of that, just because there is a giant need to have a lot of this stuff done in country, because things are just changing so rapidly that I think it's going to be, and I'm sure you'd agree, it's going to be more and more of an advantage to have things done here, at least with the companies that are creating this stuff.
No, I agree, because this goes back to my comment about supply chain security before.
Yeah.
That's a critical path that we need to look at security wise. I see a lot of peer companies, corporations, and competitive companies and corporations, to where I'm at now, heavy leverage on how do we protect our supply chain. I think that's a good positive outcome from COVID.
Yeah, it totally revealed the weakness of just in time type of shipping and a lot of the stuff that was built in.
We are in full agreement, sir.
Yeah.
That the hybrid model is probably the best model to use on that. But then how do we secure it from wherever it's manufactured? How are we testing it? Are we doing penetration testing? Are we following, I would say, due diligence, right? This is all due diligence for whoever my customer is. Can I physically install this and say, yes, this is secure? I will never tell anybody it can't be hacked, but I can tell you that the likelihood would be negligible or extremely low, whatever verbiage you want to use,
right,
on a risk matrix or a threat matrix. But the other piece that AI opens up is it does open up vulnerabilities, new ones that maybe we haven't explored before that we need to. There are corporations out there that refuse legally to let their security teams deploy facial recognition.
Right.
There are other companies out there who said, okay, we can't do facial recognition. Let's create this algorithm that I am sure my mind would be blown after like the first, iteration of it, where we can do what's called a body morphology, where it takes however many points on your silhouette and ties that to your access badge or your information, And then it recognizes you not by your face, by how your body is shaped, how you walk. And it can actually differentiate to 99% accuracy.
Wow.
To include identical twins. Which
isn't that something? Wow.
I didn't believe it until my mind was blown when I saw it. This is the kind of things we're looking for. So how does this, if you're running access control on your building, how does this look? And my vision is this. I'm probably still going to have a badge because visual recognition, right? It's a thing. And I'm good with that. Operationally, that's a good thing to have, right? I want to be able to walk up to a door and not have to swipe a badge or use near field communication or something like that. Because now we're seeing near field communications that can go over 8 feet. There are encryption schemes for NFC where it wasn't before. Where it's reading my badge, the camera recognizes who I am according to the algorithm. And if I'm authorized in that space, the light turns green and I open the door and go in.
It's a dual authentication.
Yeah, it's still a two-factor authentication to get in. Something the company has provided, traditional method, and something you've provided. I would say we would call that next level biometrics. And the thing is, it's elegant. The trouble is elegant. It's not simple.
Yeah. It's complicated, but at the same time, with that is there's greater speed with a solution like that, which is always a huge deal. You get solutions out there, and then all of a sudden you have people stacking up trying to get in. Because some of these solutions are a little slow. So yeah, that's a great solution for sure.
It is, and that's the kind of things we're looking at. How are we doing an unstaffed entry control gate? A lot of companies, I would say a lot of them I see now have gates. They have perimeter fencing. Is that staffed all the time? This goes back to the operational expense. Can we do that unstaffed? Can we leverage AI to help us with that? Can we leverage thermal to help us with that?
Right.
One of the historic things, and a lot of people who've been around a while probably understand this, the security industry gets a lot of good stuff from the automotive industry because we kind of let them beta test it first and then we take it. LiDAR is one. It was used in self-driving cars. Yeah. It's used in robotics now in a huge number of industries for all these self-driving robots running all over the place. Why can't we leverage one of those robotic arms to handle cameras? We put it on a track that can run around a vehicle that's in an enclosed parking space, and it can give me a 360. It can angle through the glass with thermal and tell me if anybody's hiding in the vehicle. You set up a wall with backscatter X-ray. Now I know who's hiding in the trunk. Now I know if anybody's inside that UPS truck other than the driver and a bunch of boxes. It's all risk-based. I call it the 4 rights when we look at this. It's the right device in the right place at the right time for the right reason. Because a lot of people will over-engineer their security systems.
Sure.
And once you hit the critical mass point, you lose value add. You're basically just throwing money. Where it's not actually raising your security posture. It's not heightening that. It's actually just creating friction with your customers. And let's face life, in security, our customers are 360 degrees around us. It could be the actual customer we're working for, or who's coming into our location, or it could be the employees who are working around us. They're still our customer as well.
Right. So, yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of a balancing act. And that's one of the other things we look at when we're building roadmaps, when we're identifying where do we want to go. The other piece that's really critical is look at your ecosystem. So your security environment, right? If you're Fortune 50, you've probably got a global footprint to some extent.
Sure.
In your ecosystem, is whatever device you're looking at scalable? I've seen a lot of really cool devices out there. But when I asked the question on lead time, and I asked the question, hypothetically, if I wanted 1,500 of these, how long would it take me to get them? And that drives further conversation, right?
Right.
Because maybe they tell you, I can do it in a month. Really? We need to sit down and talk. Or, our manufacturing just not up to that. It would take us 8 to 10 months to get that. Okay, if I've got 150 sites or 55 sites around the globe, and I'm looking to retrofit to raise the security posture at those sites,
yeah,
that's not going to make it. So that drives another conversation. How long would it take you to tool up manufacturing to do this? So those are critical key questions that you also have to ask when you're looking, where are we going to be at in 5 years?
Absolutely. Yeah, the Fortune 50 companies I've worked with, that was always a big one, is, how fast, and they want to scale something out. They have an initiative and then it's on. And it's you need to make sure you can hit those windows for them, for sure. And then those other components of security built into the products, and that was a large learning curve, I think, for a lot of security manufacturers, was what was really required. And it was really early on from the Fortune 50 companies saying, it needs to have this. And then if they couldn't come up with that and get that done in time, which I saw, then they went to somebody else because they have a template, if you would. There's certain things that they want done, and there has to be these check marks on it, or they're not going to deploy something like that, especially worldwide, because that becomes a bigger problem for a company like that. So, for sure, that's really interesting. I was going to ask you too, when it comes to researching new technology, I mean, it sounds like you're always keeping up on it, but what's the most frustrating part of that process for you, Doug?
I'm going to be politically correct here. The most frustrating part is getting to the engineers. Now, that is another change in our industry. We are seeing a lot of sales, business development side, who actually have an engineering background. They're trained as field engineers, so they can answer a lot of the questions. But to your point, well, how do I get it to do this? And I want this 3 features added in. How do we do that? If I'm asking the question, I've already got an idea in my mind of how it can be done. I just need to sit with the engineers who are going to give me the honest answers. And I know they're going to. I've dealt with companies where I said, this is on your PC board and I really don't like this. I've got a customer where I can't use near field communication or Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, right? I need those disabled. I'm looking at the schematic for the device and I was like, can we take the NFC chip off and I will pay the extra $25 per device to have it manufactured that way.
Sure.
And the salespeople, of course, were like, "Oh, we can do that." Okay, let me sit with your engineers. And then the engineer comes in and says, it's integral to the operation of the board. And that's where all my other questions start coming out. It's an input-output device. Why is it integral to the operation of the board unless you wanted it to be integral? How do we turn it off? Well, you can't. Okay. Moving on to next device. So I like to get to the engineers. The key to that, though, you always have to NDA. Some are mutual NDAs, even though I am a huge proponent of not reverse engineering anything. I dislike that from a company perspective, because that means I'm poaching, right?
Yeah.
I see it kind of as a semi-covert business espionage. Just my own language, my own opinion. I would much rather sit down and work with the engineers. There's a way we can work this out. And with the background I have and the training I have, I can understand what we're saying when we're building electrical circuits and developing ththese kind of things onto a board.
Yeah, you can follow them along. You're like,
easily.
Okay, yeah, huge advantage.
Yeah, and we're in micro components now. You don't do component troubleshooting anymore, but understanding what the components do and how I can identify it on a board definitely helps. So that's kind of the toughest piece, simply because it's about 25% of the time you get a lot of pushback until you mention, well, let me send you an NDA. So now I'm just waiting on the NDA. And once that gets finalized, generally that part happens quickly. But again, like you said, move fast.
Yeah.
Directive from leadership is have this done next week. Well, okay. I need to move fast. How can I do that when I have process that, requires X number, the SLA, maybe X number of days? So you always have to bake that in. But that's really the only frustrating part, is getting to the engineers so I can understand the technical side of it. The operational side of it's generally fairly simple.
That's really interesting. Yeah, just in terms of diving into the products, that's pretty unique. I think a lot of people are trying to get away from sort of the feeds and speeds product stuff, and it's just like, how does this address a problem? And from doing 15 years of job walks with system integrators and putting solutions together, and all the different layers for it, it's just like, I think a lot of people think about the product first and then sort of figure out, where can it fit versus here's a problem, and then what solution's going to fit, that problem, and kind of work backwards from that. And I think having the engineering component to it, to say, all right, let me really drill into this and see, how is this going to address all of these problems plus the supply chain, all of it. And that really does take it, to that next level. But I think doing the research is difficult nowadays, though, just because there's a tremendous amount of data.
A ton of stuff out there.
Yeah. And so our thing is like, what can we do to think about a list of known good products. It's this sort of boil the ocean component, I think, a lot of times, where you want to compare out every product. Well, how about just compare out the best products? So sort of a curated way of looking at what's out there and what's addressing solutions. So I think that's the hardest thing is people want to do every single product that's out there, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants to see 15 cameras compared to each other.
It's standardization, right?
Yeah.
For a corporation, it's standardization, and I approach standardization from a global perspective. You would approach it that standardization is an 80-20 proposition. And here's why. I have countries where I can't use certain equipment.
Right.
I have to use equipment that is made and manufactured in that country. The EU, I'm dealing with GDPR. Singapore leverages a lot of the EN standards that we see in EMEA. If you're in China, it's a totally different animal. How does that play into that standardization process? Which is why I always say it's kind of an 80-20 rule. But to your point, you hit the nail on the head with the reverse planning. I'm not going to look at a device and figure out how it's going to fit in. I'm going to say, this is my problem. How do I solve it?
Right.
And then backwards plan from there, saying, well, this would solve it. Is it better than what we have? So you can do that whiteboard exercise. It's almost like a Lean Six Sigma exercise with a bunch of Post-it notes and a whiteboard or a chalkboard. And you're working your way backwards.
Right.
And moving stuff around until you go, this system, because we're not looking at a device anymore. And that's another thing I think that can be frustrating. Is everybody wants you to focus on the device when I want to focus on the topology. I want to focus on the entire system and how it's going to interact.
Yeah, and that gets to that layered component too, where how does this interact with these other solutions? And it's the overall solution, meaning a lot of different components that have to work together. And you're mentioning there's corporate standards, and then that means that there are devices that work with it well, and sort of you start to get into this matchmaking component when you do have to look at solutions that are going to be a good fit, which makes it more complicated in some ways, but at the same time, having standardization makes it a lot easier to work on things and get support. So
no, it does. And to tell you the truth, I think, especially from a Fortune 50 perspective, I think we can drive change within the industry, because I can take two systems that everybody around me, they're never going to work together. And I'm thinking about it going, API is a thing. I understand APIs. Let me call up a couple of my software buddies. They're going, yeah, sure, they can make it work. It's going to be a little complex, but they can code it. Okay. So now let me go back to the manufacturer and go, hey, I need you to be able to integrate with this. Well, we don't have, could you please research that? Because I'm looking at an enterprise deployment.
Yeah.
And I've had companies reach out to people they never thought they were going to integrate with. And now they're integrated with them. Right?
Right. That's a great benefit for being able to push things like that out, because it does benefit everybody else. When a Fortune 50 puts their weight behind an integration, that's what most manufacturers are waiting for, is a deal that's going to push something for doing an integration.
It's the return on their investment, and you're helping to provide that for them. Business 101, that's good for everybody. It's a win-win. Yeah. And I'll tell you straight up, so the integrator side of it also wins, because now they can train their people in new devices from the manufacturer, get the certifications. So that broadens their scope of what they can offer.
Absolutely.
So it's a ripple in a pond effect is the way I see it. And we mentioned due diligence before. I think that's part of due diligence when you're in the Fortune 50. Ask the hard questions, step outside of the box.
Right.
And say, what can I leverage? Can I take a thermal camera and not use it as a camera? What do you mean? Well, if I put them parallel to a fence line or a cage that I'm trying to protect, now I have a thermal intrusion detection system. Well, what do you mean? I was like, it's a thermal camera. It's got machine learning and that on the edge. It's got analytics. If you set up the lines, if it crosses the line into the thermal area, if it detects anything in the thermal range, it's going to alarm. Oh, we didn't think about that before. That's why you got to step outside the box.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, though, is that the people who actually use the technology wind up thinking of, and I've seen this a million times, they think of applications and things that the manufacturer didn't even anticipate. And that's always really cool, just to see how they're using something. And like you said, what are they wanting to integrate it with, and how they're what the use case will be. That's how a lot of innovations happened actually through the years, where they do see something that, wow, we didn't even think about putting this on a ship or whatever it is. They went up doing. So we've seen some pretty neat applications like that. In terms of, we talked a little bit about some of the threats that are out there. what are things that are sort of on your radar in terms of new threats? And then I want to definitely pick your brain on robotics and drones after that.
Oh, sure. New threats. AI. Not what we use again in the security industry, because that's mostly computer vision, camera vision. There are strict guardrails with that.
Right. You're talking about brute force.
Brute force AI.
Yeah. Which is critical infrastructure is worried about that. We're talking about that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
And it's going to take AI to counter AI. I think is what's going to wind up happening because of the speed. But yeah, that's definitely cause for concern, for security. And it's funny, there's always this cybersecurity component of that. Yet, we have our devices, and as long as those things aren't, there's not a penetration on a device like we've seen in the past. All is well, but it does make you wonder, doesn't it? And there's always somebody that's very smart in the wrong way. I saw something on access control where they're looking at the light waves for something to open and seeing what the access control key card was pushing out there. And you look at AI and obviously taking over cameras or anything like that would be very bad.
No, agreed. The next one, and speaking of critical infrastructure, drones.
Yeah.
Drone swarm. How do you protect it? How do you detect it? I've done a lot of proof of concept and deep diving into drone detection. Some really super products out there. There are some really super products that are out there that aren't scalable to a Fortune 50 level. They could be at a smaller level, right?
Absolutely.
How do you detect them? But then again, here in the US, I can detect them, but what do we do then? Because the FAA won't let me use an EMP weapon.
Right.
Falcons are expensive. And they're tough to house, and you need vet services and stuff like that. But they'll take a drone out in a heartbeat if you train them. How do we deal with this moving forward, especially knowing that we can have an AI driving the swarm?
Yeah, it's funny. I think there was a video. It was sort of a what if video, and it was showing something similar to that, sort of getting away, and it had a component to it. But we've been looking at this ourselves, just because we deal a lot with critical infrastructure and substations. It freaks me out thinking about dams and electrical substations and things like that. And yeah, I mean, I think having scalable deterrence, or at least being able to monitor the airspace, is a huge help. But if there's no way to mitigate it, it's like that classic camera getting, there's a guy stealing the car, and there he went. So unless there's some way of mitigating the threat, and to your point, the FAA, it's going to be reactionary, I'm afraid, where it has to happen before something happens. But I think at least there should be certain companies or certain organizations that have access to ways of mitigating that. So that's definitely one that keeps me up at night. I could do what I can do. I think physical barriers are underrated. So
I agree.
I'm in fact, probably the next video I do, or close to it, is going to be regarding fencing, sort of the next level of fencing versus chain link, which I cut through in seconds. Even if it has a sensor, the guy did what you didn't want him to do and got out. That helps no one. So we're looking at what else is out there that has stopping power, and we're not trying to make Fort Knox, but you definitely, certain sites need to be hard, and unfortunately they're not. And I think chain link, what is that, over 100-year-old technology? we need to look beyond that a little bit.
And in
so
fact,
anyway,
I don't install chain link, which would be a standard 2-inch mesh, right?
Yeah.
On anything except for maybe secondary or tertiary inside of the perimeter.
Right.
Like Shrek said, it's an onion, and there are layers. I've with certain locations, I've done 1-inch chain mesh, which is technically anti-scale. Let's face life, nothing is anti-scale.
Right.
It's technically anti-scale. It does give you increased delay because physically they can't get a toehold. You need another device, which if you're being proactive,
a hook ladder or whatever it is that they're going to bring with them. Yeah.
And if you're being proactive with your security, you're going to see that and it's going to alarm.
That's true. Yeah. It depends on how far away
exactly
someone else. Yeah.
But critical infrastructure, same way as you. I think the physical barrier piece is underrated. I look especially substations. I deal with a lot of substations. How are we protecting them, especially here in Washington State? Now, it didn't affect me. It was more over in the Seattle-Kent area.
Sure.
But I look at attacks like in California, North Carolina, here in Washington State. What if that is a data center? What if that is to your point, a dam?
Yeah, that's
and you
level.
get a Barrett, and now you're doing way more damage than somebody with a 308 or a 30-06, right? At distance. How do we protect? A lot of my suggestion, the other one would be if somebody is using evaporative cooling on manufacturing facility, right? A lot of them rely on that evaporative cooling, and they have the big water tanks right outside the building. Most of the time, I don't see a fence around them.
Yeah, I think the bubbles or the barriers need to be larger for a lot of these things.
I agree,
including water. I mean, we can go on and on, but there are how it was before. Here's how it was before. Here how it is now. But we still have this. So we just need to have those systems in place where we pull that out. And then, of course, the challenge of infrastructure is not there. So how do I get power? How do I get signal?
Yeah.
So these cameras are going to be now out on the edge. And luckily, there's some things for that. But yeah, these are the things that I'm thinking about constantly. It's like as these things change, and then how do you mitigate those threats? But this is a big one for sure. I think probably the biggest. Critical infrastructure is definitely top of the list, right?
I agree. Whether
and
it's water, power, those grids need to stay up. I would also say, looking at kind of Congress has batted it back and forth for like 5 years now. You have all these data centers all over the United States. Well, guess what? That's kind of critical infrastructure, but they haven't declared it yet. I don't know whose side that is on. Understanding that if they get declared critical infrastructure, that brings a wealth of additional resources and that to those locations and to the fiber highway, to be specific. But it also brings the flip side of the coin, right? Now it's auditing new requirements under federal guidelines.
Yeah, that'd be what NERC SIP for those facilities.
For a lot of them, especially the data center environment, where a lot of them have substations. So it would definitely be NERC SIP. You'd have to look at that. I think data cable is still under NERC. So like fiber optic cable. So all that ICT infrastructure still needs to, look at that as well. The water tanks. I gave somebody a recommendation a couple of weeks ago. I said, you realize that if I shoot the bottom of that water tank like 3 feet off the ground, you're done. If I put a big enough hole in there, you're done. Well, what do you mean? I was like, all the water's going to drain out before you can patch it. And now
Right.
you have no cooling in your location, in your manufacturing facility. Well, what do you suggest? 8-foot concrete reinforced wall would be nice.
Yeah.
It would be a start. 12-foot if your AHJ will allow it, you know what I mean, or whoever.
Sure.
Some of the AHJs now are more like HOAs, and that's not a lie. Some of the ones I dealt with are, well, the generator fencing has to have this, and it's got to be this color. And we're not talking like galvanized steel or black or gray. We're talking it's got to be this one of these pastel or tan colors.
Oh no.
So I'm with you on the CIP. Big time on protecting our critical infrastructure. Because guess what? You can't run a manufacturing facility if you ain't got power and you ain't got water and
That's
you ain't
right.
got the basics.
Well, to your earlier thing that's business continuity.
Yeah.
I worked in data storage for years, and that's part of business continuity is you have to have sort of these backup plans, and what happens if X happens. And then for security, same thing. It's just like, well, if this happened, then you're out of luck at that point. So yeah, these are big areas that we're definitely focused on. And it's like you said, it's more of a passion project where you're trying to really figure out how can I lock this down and make it where somebody can't come in and do something to it. And that, we're looking at everything, including robotics. I think there's a place for that. And even drones, I guess, but drones, I'm looking at drones usually more on the adversary side than the other side. I guess there's components that are good, in terms of monitoring large areas or something as they get better. But I think on the ground robotics is kind of interesting.
It is. A couple 4 years ago, ran an on the ground test that didn't go real well. It actually ran into kind of destroyed the quarter panel of a brand new integrator vehicle. Luckily, I didn't have to explain that. I was just witnessing. Have looked at drone technology as a force multiplier. When you've got a drone that can travel, 35 knots, and it's straight line, and the speed limit around your factory is 5 miles an hour, and the guard force is not going to violate that because they don't want to get fired, right?
Right.
These new drones have public address capability. They can carry FLIR cameras, like forward-looking infrared cameras. They can carry 4K true day-night cameras to give the operator in your control center a visual. Hey, that person is trying to scale the fence. You call 911 while I watch them, right?
Yeah.
Because most guard forces are unarmed. They're report and observe only, which I'm good with. That's the nature of the beast. They're not to engage. I think it can become a force multiplier, but the investment has to be there because there's infrastructure investment that goes with that. I've looked at the robotic, we'll call them dogs, the quadruped robotics.
Yeah.
I know that PG&E just went all in on some, and good on them, knowing how remote their locations are, and it's critical infrastructure, so I'm okay with this.
Yeah.
You can put these things out autonomously, and they go, and when their battery runs down, they go back to their, Connex, but doghouse, and the second one comes out, right? And there's a myriad of things you can put on them. We talked about LiDAR quite a bit earlier. I've seen LiDAR on it. I've seen radar panels on them. I've seen long-range acoustic devices on them. From people like Genesis. Cameras.
Yeah.
PA speakers where you can preload, MP4s and stuff like that to say, hey, you're trespassing, you need to leave. The newer ones that I've seen because everybody's like, oh, you just tackle it and take it to the ground. Okay, this thing weighs like 400 pounds. And now they've trained them to shake like a dog would shake. It actually can kind of protect itself, where it shakes its neck and head back and forth to keep you from trying to grab it and turn it off, which was actually kind of cool and, again, kind of scary. I'm glad that AI is not running it right now, because I've seen that movie. It doesn't end well for us. Yeah, we're looking at all of that because I think we have to even to the fact of small security robots. Say you've got a manufacturing plant and you've got 2 lines in the northeast corner of the plant that aren't going to run 24/7. They shut down at 6 p.m. at night or whatever. Shut down after second shift. So we'll say 11 p.m., right? 10 or 11 p.m. But I want to make sure that everything's safe in that area. So now I can deploy these little, basically iRobot-sized robots in there that have cameras and other equipment on them where they can detect if there's a person there, and they can alarm. So it's not only a security, but that's the other piece of security, is now our blast radius. We're covering a lot of safety stuff. Our traditional loss prevention side, because, hey, we don't want people sneaking in and stealing components. What are we manufacturing? You know what I mean? Do I have rare earth metals in there?
I saw somebody putting SSD drives, and they strapped them all the way around him, going through a facility. And there's always something like that happening, from a espionage aspect.
No, I agree. One of the other things, kind of on the drone and robotics, because it's advanced technology, is looking at millimeter wave. Everybody's used to going through TSA and putting their hands up and stuff like that. Well, guess what? The same people who make those make a smaller version that you can use, and is actually quite effective. Still got to figure out the whole shoe thing. So I've dove these a little bit, where you still have to remove your shoes, but allegedly they're coming up with a solution for that. But the cool part is knowing that drones now can integrate with other systems. That was one of the big ones that threw me. Not sure. Did you make it down to ISC West this year?
Yeah, we were there.
Yeah. Met with somebody I know in the industry who was presenting out there, who was like, hey, we are now integrated with this drone company. And I was like, oh, talk to me. Because now that bubble, that layered defense in depth concept gets more robust, right? We're seeing a lot of that now, where the companies are actually reaching out on their own. So it's not us just leveraging things or saying, hey, why don't you do this? It's the companies stepping outside of the box, like you said, and creating a better security product, a better system overall.
Yeah, I love the integration. That's always been a big component. And I think if that continues to go and get stronger, that's good for everybody. But it also takes explaining these solutions out, because it has to go through. Integrators need to understand how it works and where it's going to be applied, and then how all these components work together, and then that goes out further. So the education component, I think, is really important, which is what Defender's about. But hopefully, we can have more and more manufacturers that kind of get the idea of having somebody just explain in quick, concise terms, what the benefit's going to be to the people that are actually using it. So that's always our hope. What in case people aren't familiar, we have to cover this just because of our industry.
Sure.
The difference between CSO and CISO. And there's different initiatives, different job description. But a lot of people get those confused, like we were talking about when you're doing a search on security. You want to cover that a little bit? Because I know that's an area that drives me bananas. So I'm sure it drives you crazy too.
Yeah, sure does. The trouble is, it's about as haze gray as a Navy ship right now. You have companies that don't have a CSO, that everybody falls under the CISO, which the CISO is the Chief Information Security Officer. That is more the cyber side of the house. Traditionally, the CSO, Chief Security Officer, that is more the operational security, physical security, traditional physical security side of the house. The biggest difference is CSO. It depends on how the org chart is now. Does the CISO, is it bifurcated? Or does the CISO report to the CSO? Do they both report to a senior VP or VP where they're parallel? A bifurcation like that can cause a lot of friction, right? Where if you have a single point on the org chart, say it's the CISO, then it flows down and you've got that point that can actually, that decision-making point, right? That belly button, for lack of a better term, where you've got that decision point, especially when you're talking about things. So like you do the same on both sides when we do risk development and vulnerability analysis and working like design basis threat statements. You're going to do both sides of the house. Past jobs before this, I've worked both sides of the house on that. I can tell you our side on the physical security side is easier. But the cybersecurity side is just as important. It's just way more in depth. The technical knowledge base that you need to do that CISO, and that would be the certifications like we talked about before, especially like SIA, ISC squared, people like that, where you're doing CISM, CISP, where you're the professional at that information security piece. Well, we need to understand that. There's no doubt. That's that muddy gray area where we kind of cross over, and we mentioned that a couple of times. We're more on the ops side.
Absolutely.
How is this going to work? How does the gate work? Right? How do we operate that? How do we respond to this? On the CISO side, they have the exact same thing, but it's more focused on your network, right? This also comes into play when you have a joint control center, right? So if I've got, we'll call them a SOC, for lack of a better term, where you've got a joint SOC where I've got both teams in there. Who's running the SOC? So that person has to have their feet on both sides of that river.
Both sides. Yeah.
And that is, I will tell you right now, I would not want to be a recruiter for that one. That is an extremely niche market in our world. Almost to the point that in the traditional physical security world, a trained or certified anti-terrorism professional is kind of a niche thing. The CSO I see is driving the overall risk on their side. What are the risk statements? What is the design basis threat? Are we building, like we talked about before, are we building correctly? Are we over-engineering this? Do I really need this? What's the value add where the CISO is doing the same thing?
Yeah.
Only it's backward planning on both sides, but the CISO has this added layer where, yes, this is a value. This is our solution. Okay, now we got to go test it. So I need pen testers. I need to bend it, twist it, shape it, right? And show where the holes are in a vacuum.
Right.
I don't want to look with all the layered defense I already have in my computer systems, right? Inside my IT systems. I need to look at it in a vacuum first. And that can be frustrating on our side of the house for people who don't understand that. It was for me at first. Going, yeah, but you're saying this is a high threat, CISO, but we have these that mitigate it. And then they explain that to you and you go, Oh, we have to look at it in the vacuum. Well, we should do that with our stuff too. So now when we pen test a keypad or a camera or something like that, we're doing it in a vacuum. So operation side CSO, operation traditional physical security side, CISO, I would say cybersecurity side. However, they're not separated like this. They're kind of like this, right?
Yeah. I just see the line being blurred. It's funny. I saw there was a lieutenant general in the Army saying that they need civilians to come in to fill that gap on the cybersecurity side. So it's definitely a growing area where there's not enough people. But at the same time, I think that skill set, at least for the CSO, I think they're going to have to need to understand both because kind of like you're saying, the lines are being blurred more and more.
Yeah, I agree.
But completely different skill set though at this point. So I want to say that's future. But today, I think there's just a lot of confusion from people outside the industry. So I always like to, just in case other people are listening to this because they find it interesting, then it's really a good thing to sort of show that these two worlds have a lot of different needs. So
no, agreed.
Man, I love chat. You're gonna have to come back on. This is just great to be able to.
Sure, bring me on the CIP through stuff. You and I could talk critical infrastructure all day long because we're of the same mindset.
Yeah, that's definitely my hot button, and we have bigger and bigger things that I'm hoping to get out there that are just going to really focus on that because I just want to figure out like what's everything that's out there that's worthy of talking about that we can highlight so people understand, whether it's from a system integration side to know that this is where you should be heading, or the people that are there that I just don't feel like it's easy to get information and who wants to go through as much info that they need to go through to find something useful, right? So that's the goal at least. But what would you like to share with the defender community that we're building here of other security professionals that you think would be helpful?
Yeah, thought about this one quite a bit. Don't get frustrated. That's my first one. Don't get frustrated. Breathe. Take a step back. Pull your blinders off. Especially when you're trying to present, right? Be very mindful of your audience, especially if you're talking to those C-suites, right? If you're talking to the CFO because you need money, you need to put it in terms they're going to understand. I have approached CFOs before who will ask me, why am I spending this amount of money? And it may sound flippant, it may sound sarcastic, but it's very open and transparent. My answer is what is one human life worth? Well, we've never lost, and I'm in the security world, it's never an if, it's a when, right? Just like we would say, I stated before, I'm never going to say no. I'm going to say it's negligible or very low.
Right.
I'm never going to tell you it's zero. So be very mindful of that and don't get frustrated, because frustration, if you mischannel it, can cause actions that you're going to regret. When I was young and spunky, unlike I am now, did that a couple of times, and I've learned from it. Had a lot of good mentors walk me through how to do this stuff. You can't let it frustrate you and stay inside of you, because it's going to hurt you as a human being, both mentally and physically. The second piece is, and this goes kind of with the first one, take your blinders off, think outside of the box. Especially in today's economic atmosphere. We've said a lot about Fortune 50. We've seen a lot of layoffs. Microsoft just did another round 2 days ago. And I've seen postings on LinkedIn and that about people who are, hey, I was impacted 2 days ago. Others have done multiple rounds of layoffs. Think outside of the box. Be able to present a solution security-wise, because that's our job, that meets or exceeds the standard, right? That raises your security posture, but still there's a cost-benefit analysis that can be done on it. There's a return on the investment that you can state. And if you don't understand MPV and the finance piece, you need to get with your finance team and do the 101s and 102s with them, because that's critical to what we do. Understanding that finance piece and being able, this goes back to the articulation, that's all one skill set is presenting. And I see a lot of it on LinkedIn. I'm sure, Dave, you've seen a lot of it. I've seen a lot of it on YouTube videos. This is a bad presentation. Yes, I agree. That's a horrible presentation, and I know why you got shot down. When you're doing that, seek out a peer in the industry. Most of us in the industry are in the same groups on LinkedIn and stuff like that. Reach out.
Yeah.
We are here. That's what LinkedIn's about. That's what these networks are about, right? SIA, ASIS, the Sheriff's Association, all of those. That's what this is about. You're not alone. That's the biggest piece. You're not alone. Because guess what? Somebody in this group has probably run into that at least once before, maybe multiple times, and they can give you options to help you out. Don't be afraid to ask for assistance. That's another learned skill, especially in our industry.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to say, hey, can somebody peer review this for me, please? Hey, do you have 30 minutes? We can hop on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever and chat about this. Sure. That's what we do. We need to support each other. Again, especially in this economic environment and with the changing vulnerabilities and threats that are out there.
That's great advice.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best I can convey right now. I'm sure there's probably 12 other things. But,
well, I mean, presenting, I didn't even think about that. That is a huge challenge for a lot of people. That's just not their skill set. And so they're going in to these meetings and just getting obliterated from questions. And like you're saying, everybody wants to see this ROI and trying to justify different security initiatives can be a big challenge. And I think that's part of it. And there's a lot to that. Boy, that alone could be a big segment in terms of just chatting about that, because that really goes all the way back from the manufacturer explaining things in a detailed way that helps the security professional to also put that forward to their CFO, because they have to realize that they have to do that. There's not going to be somebody with them doing that.
Correct. And the other piece is you can't use security language.
Yeah.
You have to know your audience. You have to be able to put it in terms they understand.
Right. Absolutely. Well, that's great. I guess last thing, what would you like to see Defender do, and what would you like to see on here?
Keep doing this. I already made my comment about critical infrastructure. I'm all about that. Keep bringing and seeking those people out. We need the diverse opinions, and again, that goes back to my recommendations, right, for the audience out there. Yeah. Never be afraid to learn. Never be afraid to ask for help, and always be open to the correct kind of criticism and stuff like that. I have had more than one paper shot out of this guy like Snoopy and the Red Baron. And he was not the Red Baron. That paper was Snoopy all day long going to get a root beer. Don't be afraid of that. And David, just keep up the great work. This is an outstanding forum for our industry. it brings different aspects to light, where we're not focused on, manufacturer A and their new model XYZ. We're focused on, I would tell you, common sense and logical things to discuss. Somebody's experiences, you can draw a lot from somebody else's experiences, and it just builds our network and broadens the network overall. So just keep up the great work. This is fantastic.
I really appreciate that, Doug. Well, thanks again for jumping on Defender. I can't thank you enough, and you'll have to come back on for sure. This was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I had a blast.